The small town of Oakwood Falls woke to a gray morning the day they buried Harold Emerson. Rain swept across the cemetery in sheets, and the modest gathering huddled under black umbrellas as the plain wooden casket was lowered into the sodden earth. The minister's words were swallowed by the drumming of raindrops, but no one seemed to mind. Few truly knew Harold, the quiet, unassuming old man who'd spent decades behind the counter of the town's only bookstore. "Shame about old Harold," Tom Parker muttered to his wife as they walked back to their car. "Lived here all his life and hardly left a mark." "That's not true," his wife Sarah whispered, dabbing at her eyes. "He was kind, always remembered birthdays, asked about the kids." "Still, you'd think more people would show up," Tom said, eyeing the sparse crowd dispersing through the cemetery. What neither Tom nor anyone else realized was that Harold Emerson had left behind something that would forever alter the town's perception of him and of each other. Eliza Chen, Harold's only surviving relative and a grandniece he'd met exactly twice, arrived from Boston the next day to settle his affairs. The inheritance wasn't much: the modest bookstore, a small cottage on the edge of town, and whatever possessions a man might accumulate over 87 quiet years. Eliza had taken a week off from her law practice, expecting to sell everything quickly and return to her life. But that was before she found the letter. It was tucked inside an old leather-bound journal at the bottom of a cedar chest, yellowed with age, but preserved in a sealed envelope. Written in Harold's meticulous handwriting, the envelope was simply labeled, "The Truth About Oakwood Falls." Eliza opened it out of curiosity more than anything else. She sat on the edge of Harold's neatly made bed, the springs creaking beneath her weight, and began to read. "To whom it may concern. If you're reading this, I have finally passed from this world. I have lived among the people of Oakwood Falls for nearly all my life, watching from behind my counter, from my usual bench in the park, from the corner table at Marie's diner. They think I saw nothing. They are wrong. What follows is the truth, about everyone. I have spent decades collecting these secrets, observing the hidden lives behind the smiles and nods exchanged on Main Street. Some might call it spying. I call it seeing what others choose to ignore." Thomas Parker embezzled $27,000 from the Little League Fund in 2003 to cover gambling debts. He replaced it over time, but the money that built the new baseball field came from his guilt, not his generosity as everyone believes. Eliza's eyes widened as she continued reading. Harold's letter meticulously documented dozens of secrets, large and small, implicating nearly everyone in town. Affairs, financial indiscretions, hidden addictions, covered-up accidents, family betrayals, all recorded in calm, methodical prose. Harold named names, included dates, referenced evidence. She set the letter down, her hands shaking. This wasn't the ramblings of a bitter old man. The details were too precise, the secrets too specific. Somehow, the quiet bookseller had known everything about everyone. The question was, what should she do with this information? Part 2. The Spark. 3 days after Harold's funeral, Eliza called a meeting at the bookstore. She'd spent those days verifying what she could of Harold's claims. Subtle questions to townspeople who came to express condolences, careful observations of interactions, and discreet online searches that confirmed financial and public record details. To her increasing unease, everything she could check had proven accurate. She invited only 6 people initially, those Harold had written the most about and whose secrets seemed most consequential: Mayor Diana Powell, Police Chief James Bennett, Dr. Robert Winters, School Principal Evelyn Harris, Bank Manager William Hoffman, and local reporter Megan Turner. "Thank you all for coming," Eliza said, closing the bookshop door behind the last arrival. "I know you're busy and you barely know me, but I found something that concerns all of you." "We're always happy to help family of Harolds," Mayor Powell said, her smile professional and practiced. He was a fixture in our community. That's just it, Eliza said. I don't think any of you really knew him at all. She placed the letter on the table. My uncle left this behind. It contains information about everyone in this room and many others in town. The room fell silent. Chief Bennett leaned forward slightly. What kind of information are we talking about? Personal information, secrets, things that were never meant to be public. Eliza watched their faces carefully. For instance, Mayor Powell, he knew about the real reason you divorced your first husband. The color drained from Diana Powell's face. That's impossible. No one knows about that except... Exactly, Eliza cut in. And Dr. Winters, he knew about the patient records you altered in 2015. The doctor's hand trembled as he reached for his water glass. This is absurd. Harold was just a bookseller. Was he? Eliza asked. Because he seems to have known that you, Chief Bennett, covered up your son's involvement in the hit-and-run that killed Mrs. Abernathy's dog last year. The chief's face hardened. That's a serious accusation. It's all in here, Eliza tapped the letter. Along with Mr. Hoffman's creative accounting for certain wealthy clients, Ms. Harris's relationship with a former student after he graduated, and Ms. Turner's fabricated sources for her exposé series. The room erupted in denials and demands to see the letter. Eliza held up her hands. I haven't decided what to do with this information yet, but I needed to understand who my uncle really was, and how he knew all this. This is blackmail, Mayor Powell hissed. What do you want? Money? Eliza shook her head. I'm not blackmailing anyone. I'm trying to solve a mystery. Harold spent his entire life in this town, seemingly unnoticed by all of you, yet somehow he knew your deepest secrets. I want to know how. And what happens if you don't get answers? Chief Bennett asked, his voice dangerously low. Then perhaps the town deserves to know who's really running it, Eliza replied evenly. After they left, some angry, others pleading, all visibly shaken, Eliza locked the letter in Harold's old safe. She hadn't shown them most of the contents, including the most disturbing revelation of all. Harold had written that one person in town was responsible for his sister's disappearance 60 years ago, a cold case that had never been solved. Somewhere in Oakwood Falls lived a killer who had walked free for decades, and Harold had known who it was all along. Part 4. Hidden Corners. The cottage had been thoroughly ransacked. Drawers emptied onto floors, furniture upended, even floorboards pried up in places. Chief Bennett surveyed the damage with professional detachment, but Eliza caught the nervous glance he cast her way. They were looking for something specific, he said. Any idea what? I think we both know, Eliza replied coldly. After their confrontation at the bookstore, she didn't trust him. The letter is secure elsewhere. Relief and frustration crossed his face in equal measure. Miss Chen, I understand your suspicion, but this situation is becoming dangerous. Whatever game your uncle was playing... It wasn't a game to him, Eliza interrupted. And I didn't break into my own temporary residence to create drama. Bennett sighed. Look, Harold was... complicated. I respected him even if we weren't close. But this letter has everyone on edge. People are afraid, acting irrationally. Afraid of the truth coming out? Afraid of half-truths and old mistakes ruining lives, he countered. Yes, I did cover for my son with that hit-and-run. It was wrong. But it was a dog, not a person, and he was 17 and panicked. Should that one moment define his entire future? The genuine pain in his voice gave Eliza pause. Harold's letter had presented facts without context or compassion, just clinical observations of human failings. I'm not interested in exposing anyone publicly, she said finally. I just want to understand who Harold really was and why he compiled all this. Bennett seemed to make a decision. There's something you should see. Not here, at the station. Records that might help explain your uncle's preoccupation with secrets. An hour later, Eliza sat in Bennett's office, a thick file folder open before her. Inside were police reports dating back to 1963, detailing the disappearance of Lucy Emerson, Harold's younger sister. 17 years old, Bennett explained. Vanished walking home from a dance. The case was before my time, but every chief passes it down to the next. Our town's great unsolved mystery. The file contained witness statements, search party maps, and photographs of a smiling teenage girl who shared Harold's serious eyes. The investigation had been extensive, but ultimately fruitless. Lucy had simply disappeared. Harold never stopped looking, Bennett said quietly. For decades, he filed regular inquiries about the case, submitted potential leads. Most were dead ends, but he was methodical. Eliza studied the final pages, notes from interviews conducted in the early 1970s. One name appeared repeatedly in Harold's neat handwriting in the margins: Richard Hoffman. Hoffman? Like William Hoffman, the bank manager? Bennett nodded. His father. Richard was Lucy's boyfriend at the time. He was questioned extensively but had an alibi for that night. He was at home with his parents and younger brother. The same brother who now runs the bank? Yes, the Hoffmans have been pillars of this community for generations. Bennett closed the file. Harold never accepted Richard's innocence, but there was no evidence linking him to Lucy's disappearance. And where is Richard now? And where is Richard now? Died in 1989, car accident on Highway 16. Eliza absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place. Harold's obsessive documentation of others' secrets had begun after his sister vanished, and the Hoffman family featured prominently in his letter. "Chief," she asked carefully, "does William Hoffman know I have this letter?" Bennett's hesitation was answer enough. Part 5. Reflections and Shadows. The next morning, Eliza arrived at the bookstore to find William Hoffman waiting outside. In his mid-60s, he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to respect, though his posture seemed more rigid than usual. "Ms. Chen," he greeted her formally. "Might I have a word?" She let him in, but kept the closed sign turned. Something in his demeanor made her uneasy. "I understand you've been asking questions about my family," he began, once they were seated in Harold's small office. "About my father and Lucy Emerson." Eliza maintained a neutral expression. "I'm trying to understand my uncle better." "Harold Emerson spent his life nursing unjustified suspicions about my father," Hoffman said tersely. "It was unfortunate." "Was it unjustified?" Eliza asked. "Your family appears quite frequently in his letter." Hoffman's jaw tightened. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm directly asking if your family had something to do with Lucy Emerson's disappearance, and if that's why Harold documented your family's indiscretions so thoroughly." "This is preposterous," Hoffman stood abruptly. "My father was a good man. He was cleared by the police." "And yet Harold never believed that, did he? 60 years of watching your family, documenting everything, that's not random." "Harold was obsessed, unbalanced by grief." Hoffman's composure cracked. "He spent decades trying to connect my father to Lucy's disappearance because he couldn't accept that sometimes terrible things happen without explanation." Eliza watched him carefully. "The letter mentions a specific incident in 1986 involving you and Harold, a confrontation at the old Emerson family home after your father died." Hoffman paled visibly. He had no right to trespass." "What was he looking for, Mr. Hoffman? What did he think was hidden there?" The banker's hands trembled slightly. "Ms. Chen, you're playing with fire. Some secrets are buried for good reasons." "Like Lucy?" The words hung in the air between them. Hoffman's face went through a complex series of emotions before settling into something like resignation. "You really don't understand what you're doing," he said quietly. "Harold's obsession poisoned his entire life. Don't let it poison yours, too." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Whatever you think you know about my family, remember this. Appearances can be deceiving. Even Harold couldn't see everything." After he left, Eliza sat motionless, turning his words over in her mind. There was something she was missing, something Harold might have missed as well. She returned to the letter, reading each section about the Hoffman family carefully. William's tax evasion, his wife's prescription drug problem, his son's academic cheating scandal, all meticulously documented, but nothing that pointed to involvement in Lucy's disappearance. Then a detail caught her eye. A brief mention of the Hoffman family summer cabin, where William's brother Daniel had spent increasing amounts of time since retiring early from his surgical practice. The same Daniel Hoffman who had been only 12 when Lucy disappeared, too young to be considered a suspect. Harold had noted, "Daniel returns to the cabin every year on the anniversary of Lucy's disappearance. Claims it's for fishing, but the lake is always empty when he goes." Eliza checked the date. Today was June 17th. 60 years ago today, Lucy Emerson had walked into the night and never returned. Part 6. The Weight of Knowledge. The Hoffman family cabin sat on the shore of Lake Silverwood, about 20 miles outside of Oakwood Falls. The narrow dirt road leading to it wound through dense pine forest, secluded and rarely traveled except by the few families who owned property along the lake. Eliza parked her rental car in a small turnout half a mile from the cabin and continued on foot. She wasn't entirely sure what she was doing, confronting a potentially dangerous man based on a hunch, and the cryptic notes of her reclusive uncle seemed foolhardy at best. She'd left a sealed envelope with Helen Abernathy to be opened if she didn't return by evening. As she approached, she could see smoke rising from the cabin's chimney despite the warm June day. A blue sedan sat in the driveway, the only sign that someone was there. She was about to step into the clearing when voices made her freeze. Two men stood on the cabin's porch, engaged in intense conversation. One she recognized as William Hoffman. The other, gray-haired and slightly stooped, she assumed was Daniel. "Should never have kept it," Daniel was saying, his voice carrying in the still afternoon air. "All these years, Will. All these years looking over our shoulders." "It protected the family," William replied. "Father would have wanted—" "Father is the reason we're in this mess." Daniel's voice rose sharply. "His obsession with that girl, his temper, and we've spent our lives paying for it." Eliza pressed closer to a large pine, straining to hear as their voices dropped. "Almost found it in '86, William was saying. "If I hadn't caught him in time—" "And now his niece is here, asking the same questions." Daniel sounded weary. "Maybe it's time, Will. I can't keep carrying this. Every June coming back here, standing over that spot." Eliza's heart pounded as Daniel gestured toward the lakeside, where a small dock extended into the water. William seemed to be trying to calm his brother, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No one can prove anything now. It's been 60 years. "Harold knew," Daniel said flatly. "He didn't have proof, but he knew. I could see it in his eyes every time we crossed paths, just watching, waiting for us to slip up." William's response was too quiet to hear, but both men turned back toward the cabin door. As they disappeared inside, Eliza released the breath she'd been holding. The implication was clear. Lucy's body was somewhere on this property, and the Hoffman brothers knew exactly where. But their conversation suggested something unexpected. It was their father Richard who had been responsible, not them. Eliza circled carefully toward the lakeside, keeping out of sight of the cabin windows. The narrow dock creaked under her weight as she walked its length, searching for anything unusual. Nothing seemed out of place, just weathered wood and clear water. She was about to turn back when she noticed something odd about the small boathouse attached to the dock's end. Unlike the main cabin, which was well maintained, the boathouse showed signs of deliberate neglect. Its door was secured with a rusted chain and padlock that looked decades old. A soft voice behind her made her jump. "He never used the boathouse after it happened." Eliza whirled to find Daniel Hoffman standing on the dock, regarding her with tired eyes. There was no anger in his expression, only a profound weariness. "You're Harold's niece," he stated. "You have his eyes. And you know what happened to his sister," Eliza replied steadily, despite her racing heart. Daniel nodded slowly. "I was 12, old enough to understand, too young to stop it." He moved to the edge of the dock and looked down into the water. "My father had a terrible temper. Lucy wanted to break things off with him. He couldn't accept it." "He killed her?" "It was supposedly an accident. He pushed her during an argument and she hit her head on the boathouse door." Daniel's voice was detached, as if reciting a story he'd rehearsed countless times. "But then he panicked, wrapped her in a tarp with weights, and—" He nodded toward the deep water. "And you and William helped cover it up." "Not initially. I just saw it happen. But as we grew older, we became complicit in maintaining the secret. Our mother knew too, but she died carrying the guilt." He turned to face Eliza. "We were just children trying to protect our family. By the time I was old enough to understand the magnitude of what we'd done, it seemed too late to come forward." "Harold suspected all along." Daniel nodded. "He started watching us after the initial investigation. At first, it was obvious. He'd follow my father around town. Later, he became more subtle, just always there, observing. After my father died, his attention turned to Will and me. That's when he started documenting everything." "Why didn't he go to the police with his suspicions?" "No evidence," William's voice came from behind them. He stood at the beginning of the dock, hands in his pockets. "Just the intuition of a grieving brother, and later, I think he realized that punishing us wouldn't bring Lucy back. So instead, he punished you by watching, by knowing everything about your lives," Eliza said, understanding dawning. "The letter wasn't just about Lucy. It was about power, control." "Harold made himself the conscience of this town," Daniel agreed. "Not just for us, but for everyone. Knowing their secrets gave him purpose after Lucy was gone." Eliza looked between the two aging brothers, seeing not monsters but broken men shaped by a decades-old tragedy. "What happens now?" Part 7. Release. The excavation of Lake Silverwood took 3 days. Divers located Lucy Emerson's remains exactly where Daniel Hoffman indicated they would be, weighted down in the deepest part of the lake, just off the family dock. After 60 years underwater, little remained besides bones and the remnants of a tarp. But it was enough for identification. Both Hoffman brothers gave full statements to Chief Bennett. Though Richard Hoffman had been the one who killed Lucy, both sons had maintained the secret as adults, becoming accessories after the fact. Given their age and health conditions and the complicated nature of the case, they were unlikely to serve prison time, but the truth had finally emerged. The town of Oakwood Falls reeled from the revelation. The Hoffman family had been central to the community for generations, respected, admired, trusted with the town's money and its secrets. The knowledge that they had harbored such a dark history forced everyone to reconsider their understanding of their neighbors and themselves. 1 week after Lucy's remains were recovered, Eliza sat in Harold's bookstore after hours with Helen Abernathy and Chief Bennett, the infamous letter spread on the table between them. "I've read it completely now," Bennett said, pushing the pages away with a mixture of awe and distaste. "Every single person in town, at least those who were here more than a few years, He documented everything. Not everything, Helen corrected gently. Only the things people needed to hide. Harold wasn't interested in ordinary flaws or everyday troubles. Eliza had spent days weighing what to do with the letter. Its contents could tear the community apart. Marriages, careers, and reputations would be destroyed. Yet keeping it secret felt like perpetuating the cycle of hidden truths that had defined Harold's life. He never meant for it to be found, Eliza said finally. This wasn't a dead man's revenge plot. If he'd wanted these secrets revealed, he could have arranged it. Then why write it at all? Bennett asked. Helen smiled sadly. For the same reason people keep diaries or confess to priests. The burden of knowing was too heavy to bear alone, but he couldn't bring himself to hurt the people he watched over for so long. Watched over or watched? Eliza asked. Both, I think, Helen replied. Harold understood something fundamental about people, that everyone has secrets, everyone makes mistakes. His tragedy wasn't that he knew too much about others, it was that he never let anyone know him. The three sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the paradox of Harold Emerson, the invisible man who saw everything, the keeper of secrets who died with his own story untold. I've decided what to do with the letter, Eliza announced. I'm going to burn it, tonight. Bennett looked surprised. After everything you've discovered? The letter is evidence of human frailty, Eliza interrupted. Lucy's case is solved. The Hoffmans have confessed. Everything else in here, it belongs to the people involved. They should decide whether and when to confront their own secrets. Later that evening, the three of them stood in the small garden behind Harold's cottage. Eliza had built a fire in the metal pit, and the flames cast dancing shadows across their faces. One by one, she fed the pages of Harold's letter into the fire, watching the careful handwriting curl and blacken. As the last page burned away, Eliza felt a sense of release, not just for herself, but for Harold, too. In letting go of his secrets, she hoped his spirit might finally find peace alongside his long-lost sister. The following day, Eliza reopened the bookstore. To her surprise, a steady stream of townspeople came through, not to buy books, but to share stories about Harold, small kindnesses he'd done anonymously, moments of unexpected insight or compassion, the way he always seemed to have exactly the right book ready when someone was struggling. He knew I was having trouble with my son, confided one woman, and without a word he set aside that parenting book for me. It saved our relationship. After my husband died, another elderly resident shared, Harold noticed I'd stopped reading our favorite mysteries. He started delivering a new one each week to my door. Never said anything about it, just left them with a note. The story continues. By the end of the week, Eliza had heard dozens of such stories. Harold had used his gift for observation not just to collect secrets, but to understand needs. Behind his quiet exterior had been a man deeply connected to his community, not through conventional relationships, but through silent acts of attention and care. On her final day in Oakwood Falls, Eliza visited Lucy's burial site. After 60 years, Lucy Emerson had finally been laid to rest beside her brother. Standing before their graves, Eliza reflected on the strange inheritance Harold had left her. Not just a bookstore or a cottage, but a lesson about seeing and being seen. Harold had spent his life watching others, documenting their secrets, yet revealing almost nothing of himself. In death, through the chaos and healing his letter had inadvertently caused, the town had finally begun to see him. As Eliza placed flowers on both graves, she whispered, "The story continues, Uncle Harold." In the distance, life in Oakwood Falls went on, changed by secrets revealed and secrets burned away, but ultimately stronger for having faced its hidden truths. And in the bookstore on Main Street, Harold's carefully curated collection waited for new readers, Each volume a reminder that every person contains stories visible only to those who truly know how to look. Epilogue. 3 months after leaving Oakwood Falls, Eliza received a package in her Boston apartment. Inside was a weathered journal, not the one that had contained the infamous letter, but an earlier volume, its pages filled with Harold's distinctive handwriting. Unlike the letter, this journal contained no secrets about townspeople. Instead, it was Harold's record of his own life, his thoughts, his quiet observations about literature and nature, and most importantly, his feelings about Lucy. A note from Helen Abernathy accompanied the journal. Dear Eliza, found this while helping clean out the cottage for sale. Thought you should have it. Harold always meant for someone to know him eventually. I think he would have wanted it to be you. Warmly, Helen. That evening, Eliza curled up in her window seat overlooking the city and began to read. The first entry was dated 1 week after Lucy's disappearance. I dream of her every night, always the same dream. Lucy walking toward me through the bookstore, stopping at each shelf, running her fingers along the spines. You have all these stories, she says, but you've forgotten mine. I wake up promising to remember, to keep looking, to find the truth. People say I should accept that she's gone. But how can I? Someone in this town knows what happened. Someone walks past me each day carrying the weight of her absence. I'll watch and wait, and one day they'll reveal themselves. Until then, I'll keep her memory alive in the only way I know how, by witnessing everything, missing nothing. The world took my sister. In return, I will become its most faithful observer. As she read deeper into Harold's private thoughts, Eliza discovered a man far more complex than the quiet bookseller everyone had known. A man of deep feeling and fierce loyalty, whose grief had shaped him into both a guardian and a ghost in his own town. His final entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, I've lived a strange life, watching over this town from the shadows. I know their sins and their struggles, their moments of weakness and courage. I've kept their secrets as I've kept my own. Perhaps this was never about finding justice for Lucy, but about finding purpose in her absence. I wonder, when I'm gone, if anyone will truly have known me, or if, like the characters in so many books I've sold, I'll remain a mystery to be solved by whoever turns the final page. Eliza closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Harold had spent his life collecting other people's stories while keeping his own hidden. But in death, he had finally allowed himself to be known, first through the explosive revelations of his letter, then through the community's rediscovery of his quiet acts of kindness, and now through these intimate reflections shared only with her. The letter he never sent had changed Oakwood Falls forever. But this journal, the story he had written for himself, had changed Eliza. She placed it carefully on her bookshelf, where it would remain among her most treasured possessions, a reminder that even the most ordinary-seeming lives contain extraordinary depths. And in Oakwood Falls, Harold Emerson, once barely noticed in life, had become a legend, the quiet bookseller who had seen everything and, in his own way, had loved the town enough to both expose and protect its deepest truths. The end.